Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really excited to be sat here chatting with author and ultimate novel writing course tutor Sara Lippmann. Hi Sarah.
Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be here.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for joining us. Really thrilled that you're also going to tutor on our Ultimate Novel Writing course this year. For anyone that's interested in the course, I'll be popping the link in the chat after our conversation. And if you do have any questions for Sarah, either about the course or just about writing in general or about her career so far, also pop those into the chat and we'll do our very best to get those all answered for you today. So thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoy this conversation. So just before we get started, I'll just give you a little bit more info about Sarah, just in case you haven't come across her work before, and if not, go out and check it out because it is fantastic. So Sarah's the author of the story collection Doll Palace and also the story collection Jerks, released by Mason Jar Press. She has been awarded an Artist Fellowship in Fiction from the New York Foundation for the Arts, and her work has appeared in the Literary Hub, the Washington Post, Best Small Fiction, Split Lip, amongst many other publications. She holds a BA from Brown and an MFA from the New School and lives with her family in Brooklyn. And her debut novel, Lech, is going to be published by Tortoise Books in October. So really looking forward to that one coming out. And I know you're kind of in the thick of it at the moment and just getting those final bits prepped and sorted for its release. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
Of course. It's a good time.
I know. We'll have fun today. We'll get into it. So if you've got any questions for Sarah, pop them into the chat. But to get us started, I'm just really curious just to know a bit about your process as a writer. I mean, you've written 2 collections of short stories, and then you're going to be releasing your debut novel this October. So what initially drew you to writing short stories? And then how did you know when a story came along that it was going to be better suited to the novel format rather than as a shorter piece of fiction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I do think so. I see myself as a story writer, first and foremost. I mean, I have written a novel and now I'm kind of mostly writing novels, and I'll return to that in a second. But I do believe that innately we writers, we kind of know what our sweet spot is. This is how we decide whether we're playwrights or poets or fiction writers or genre, what have you. But within the under the rubric of fiction writer, I do feel like we, again, we're story writers, we're novel writers. And then within the subcategory of story writers, I also feel like we have a sweet spot of narrative length. So I tend to sort of naturally gravitate toward not just the short story, but towards rather short stories. Part of that was determined by the fact that I really got majorly into writing stories, my first collection, when my kids were quite young. And so I really didn't have a lot of time. And so because I had the time constraint, that wound up being also an external constraint in terms of word count. And so I was writing a lot of flash. That has sort of relaxed somewhat. And, as I have had more time for my own work, I've been able to sustain a narrative for longer than, when you're a young mom and you've such an attention span.
Yeah.
Everybody wants something from you. But to the second part of your question of how do you know whether it's a story or a novel? And again, I think one of the best tools that writers have in our toolbox, I mean, we doubt it and yet we have to trust it, but that's our intuition. And I think like intuitively, this idea for this novel, it felt bigger. It felt like paced out bigger. It just had a different sort of rhythm to it. Yeah. And I sat with the idea for many years, primarily because I see myself as a story writer first and not a novelist. And so I was thinking, could I wrangle it into a story? But no, it kept working on me in a novelistic sense. And so that's how I knew I had to go forth in that way.
Oh, fantastic. Was that the first time you kind of had that experience? Have there been stories in the past that kind of appeared to you in the same way, but you had to let go because you didn't have the time to fully develop them?
Yeah. Okay. So this is this is why I should have taken the ultimate novel writing course many times, because I'm a great abandoner of work. And so I would say that, this novel that I'm putting forth in October is the first novel that I saw all the way through. And so I have started novels in the past and abandoned them because it felt very overwhelming. And the idea of staying with a body of work for so long, has made me a little skittish, especially when I didn't have that kind of time. So this was the first time I saw a novel all the way through.
Oh, fantastic. And then I guess I'm just curious to know what the process was like in regards to getting that published. How did that differ? And I guess, how did you approach your agent? Because obviously you're known for your short story collections. Are they welcoming when you come to them and say, actually, this time I want to publish a novel, or what's that kind of like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. So my story is a little bit, I'll actually back up a little bit because it's the story of how I acquired my agent, which is my first book was unagented. And then I was giving a reading at an organization called Penn Prentice here in New York. It's actually a literary organization designed for writers who are parents. And so I was giving a reading there, and my future agent, my current agent, happened to be attending the reading because one of her clients was also reading with me. And so she actually reached out and signed me before I had the novel. So it was on the promise of the idea of a novel. So I don't necessarily recommend doing. I think it's actually much healthier to sort of write the book first so that you and your agent are on the same page as what kind of project you're putting forth before, but so we signed on sort of the premise, the idea of the novel. And then, the novel took a long time to come out. It went through a lot of revision. It was really quite long initially. And, all of the sort of the narrative questions that you'll hear me asking, should you sign up for the course, about stakes and tension and all that kind of stuff, were questions that I had to address and deal with. So once I pared it down significantly, and I think one of the downfalls, again, of being primarily a short story writer is that my novel suffered from what I will call, and what a dear friend of mine who read it called, well, I'm stealing the term from her, but I think it's applicable. It's called, she said, your novel suffers from storyitis, which is that, that the narrative beats go differently. The narrative beats accrue differently in a story versus in a novel. And so I had to sort of break that pattern and think more novelistically, which had to do with dialing up certain elements of drama. Once we got to that point, again, this took years, but my agent is someone who was she's very hands-on, and so she read a number of drafts, and then we actually went on submission in the height of the pandemic, which was a tricky time. So, it's taken time, and then I actually wound up. The book is coming out with a smaller press out of Chicago called Tortoise Books.
Oh, fantastic! And I guess, it sounds like it's been quite the journey. Could you just give us a little bit of an insight into what the book's about? Just a taster for people who.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think part of the reason why, again, we can talk about market, or I can at least just share my experience. But my novel, it's a polyvocal novel. There's 5 points of view, which was fun to write, but also can have an effect on the pacing of a book when you keep switching points of view. So it's a bit of a, it's a story about the potential sale of a property up in upstate New York, where I'm dialing in from right now, up in the Catskills. But it really deals with the central question about how to go forth in your life, how to reckon with your past in order to move forward and through it. And so it's following that narrative arc through the lives of 5 different people. And there is over the course of the summer of 2014.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds really interesting. So I'm really excited to read it when it comes out, and I'm sure everyone watching is going to. But that's quite a tough question to tackle, because I know it's something that I think a lot of us try to deal with, but it feels like you can never really get the answers to. So it must have been really interesting to write it. Yeah.
It was fun. But it's good. I'm glad that I'm about to see the other side of it. So
Yeah, that would be definitely worth the wait after. Yeah. Oh, amazing. And so you've said obviously, you're drawn towards literary fiction in particular above like all other genres. What is it about this particular genre that like really draws you in, and why do you choose to kind of to write in this one solely?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm drawn to language. I think first and foremost, my earliest experiences with, as a reader, as a child, I was drawn into, the language on the page, language and character being paramount are, obviously characters, integral language and character integral to all genres. So I don't mean to like shortchange other genres, but it's really sort of
No.
startling components of language, a certain palpable energy, and sort of the thematic wrestling and grappling that's happening on the page. So it's the fact that literary fiction often puts a certain demand on the reader in terms
Yeah.
of level of engagement, and it can be quite challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And it's that payoff in the way that literary fiction sort of challenges the status quo and sort of shifts your thinking, and also has like a real temperature change on the body and the mind and in the heart
Yeah.
that draws me.
Yeah, oh, I love that. I love that kind of analogy. And it's when in the writing process, then are there things that you deliberately want to leave open to the reader to kind of bring in from their personal experience? So I guess you're not giving them everything. It's kind of leaving it open for them to have that experience and to, use the work as a, tool in their journey, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody, I mean, and that's true. I think that's true of everybody. The reading experience is so subjective. This is also why
Yeah.
the publishing marketplace is so subjective, because everybody's imprinting, their own experience onto a text as well. And, I
Yeah.
do think that that's a level of generosity that we as writers can do, is kind of leave space for the reader, to enter. And yet at the same time, it can be a fine balance, because we don't want to be, obtuse or unclear either. I think
Yeah.
also clarity is a huge generosity that we need to afford our writers. I mean, our
Yeah.
readers, rather.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's kind of finding that right balance, I guess, and just
exactly,
like really then to the back there. Yeah, that's
exactly.
fantastic. I guess, for me, like when I'm reading something, it is that kind of it's quite difficult. Like you said, it's so subjective. It's difficult to kind of even just for myself pinpoint why I like a certain book or why something really stands out to me or sticks in my mind. Are there any like commonalities for you as to why you're drawn towards particular works of fiction or
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's like there's a certain palpable energy, and I don't mean to be sounding so abstract, but I do feel like there is a certain energy that I'm drawn to, reading again. And this can be across genre, this can be memoir, nonfiction, but like the books that last, or the books that I remember, have a certain narrative energy. Often it's on the language of on the level of language or on character, but it's also tied to the sense of urgency, the sense that the writer needed to tell a certain story and needed to
yeah.
tell it in a certain way, and it had to be this way. It has a sense of tangible imperative of drive that is very
Mm.
attractive to me as a reader.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's, yeah, a fab way to look at it. I think it's something that, do you think it's something that can be learned as a writer to kind of, embed into your own works to be able to like give readers that experience? Or is it something that's kind of almost, I don't want to say it's something that you kind of just have as a natural skill. Do you think it is something that can be developed?
I'm smiling here because this is something, I write MFA, like a lot of MFA recommendation letters, for former students who then, go on to get MFA, seek out
Yeah.
MFAs. And I mean, I'd say one of the lines that I often talk about is, this spark, this energy. And I do think, I mean, obviously I believe that craft can be taught. I've been a teacher for so many years in so
Yeah.
many different capacities, and craft can really be taught. Can that spark be? I think most people have that spark. The writers that I really are drawn to have that spark. It is somewhat innate. I also do feel, however, that, you know, we are all born with sparks. It's just a matter of whether we tap them or not. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's sort of reckoning with the self, or reckoning with your own work, and asking yourself, am I being, you know, sometimes we can be, again, sort of skittish, and we're afraid to go, you know, we're afraid to sort of let that fire, you know, unleash that full fire, you know, and
Yeah.
it can be scary, especially when that sense of imperative, or that energy spark is tied to content that perhaps that we didn't necessarily want to unleash, or what have you. But
Sure.
and again, I'm talking purely in the fictional realm. When I say things like emotional honesty, I'm still talking um, within the construct of fiction. But I think that's another thing that I'm really looking for. Does this book feel emotionally honest? And so
Yeah.
that is something that I think is tied to the spark, to the energy, to sort of the fearlessness of revealing an emotional truth in fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's just, I guess, a really useful way to look at it in the context of, you know, if everyone has a spark, like you said, and just kind of finding the best way to kind of like tap into that, and just really, I guess, be able to find that truth within yourself. I know a lot of people write for a lot of different reasons, but I think when it comes down to it, I think if you're coming from that place of like just honesty and, you know, just truth, then what you write will be compelling in its way, regardless. So that's, yeah, it's really
Yeah,
interesting.
it'll naturally dial the urgency. I mean, it's funny, like you know, we grow up, and I mean, obviously we've grown up in different places, so I'm not, you know, here to conflate everybody's experience, but those of us who are in
Yeah.
school, you know, we're taught to, you know, when we think about writing, we're not necessarily told to, you know, we sort of want to contain the emotions, you know, and so
Yeah.
professional in a certain realm, all this stuff. And so there can
Yeah.
be sort of this, it's scary, you know, it can be very scary to sort of go there. I think there's that very cheesy Hemingway quote about, I write, I just, you know, I go to the page and I bleed, you know, whatever that
Oh
is.
yeah, yeah.
You know, and I mean, I think that's reductive and, you know, sort of cheesy, but the idea of going there, even if it's scary, and even
Yeah.
if it can be painful, but I do think that that's what will imbue your writing with that sort of that electricity and that
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So I'm also just kind of curious to know, um, like, because you've obviously, you know, taught creative writing for many years, and, you know, in a lot of different contexts of students, what kind of drew you into wanting to kind of help other writers along in that way and kind of be a mentor to them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what's unique about this course, and what really is attractive to me about this year-long course, is that the process of writing anything, you know, unless you're like at the newspaper desk, but it's a very isolating and often alienating process. You sort of toil away at your desk without a lot of people. There's no, and certainly through COVID, you know, you're not even working necessarily at a coffee shop. There's very, you know, it's hard to find people, you know, to commiserate with and to talk to, and maybe your friends and family or your partners are, you know, exhausted by hearing you sort of gripe about your novel writing process. And so it's, you know, I think there's really something to be said for the strength of community,
Yeah.
for, you know, putting together a cohort of writers who are also in the trenches, committed to their project, and exercising that discipline day to day over the course of a year. And for me as a tutor, first of all, selfishly, it's something that I wish that I had had myself when I was writing this novel. Maybe it wouldn't have taken as many years if I, you know, had that power of community.
Yeah.
But it's something, you know, it's certainly, I mean, this is the way, and my students would attest to this. It's like, there's almost very little separation between the tutor and student, in the sense of, yes, I've been through it, I know what it's like, and I can tell you to keep going, and that every feeling that you're, you know, when you're stuck in that murky middle, that's a natural place to be. And, you know, when you're you know, questioning your central premise, that's a natural place to be. And that, like,
Yeah.
everything that you're going through is actually a healthy component to the writing process. yeah, I mean, and to foster those connections and to see now I'm sort of on the other end of it where I've been all summer, I've been evaluating the full manuscripts that have come in from the course, and it's really inspiring. Selfishly, it's very inspiring to be surrounded by all these students who have dedicated a year of their lives to their projects and have really seen them to fruition, and that's something enormous to be celebrated, regardless of what happens next in terms of publication. But the idea of writing a book in a year is just an enormous accomplishment.
It is, it really is. And I think a lot of people even look at it and say, well, that's not possible. I think, like, what would you advise? Because I know there's some students who come onto the course who already kind of have, the manuscript quite fleshed out, but then there's other, people who come with just the bare bones or just like a rough draft or idea. What would you recommend is the best starting off point for people thinking of joining this course?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And again, it sort of depends on the type of person that you are. But I'm seeing in my students right now, the ones that have, most of my students have been chewing on their idea for a while, right? The most of my students who have completed the full draft in a year had been chewing on that idea for a long time, whether it's they'd already had what I call, and forgive me, I hope I can curse on this channel, like what we call the shitty first draft. That's a quote from Anne Lamott, who's is you'll see represented in the course, but like this idea of having what I call sort of the vomit draft, having had putting down some words, some thinking on the project. I think that's and to know that you have there's enough energy around it for you that you want to stay with it for a year, because as I shared on my own experience, I've abandoned novels. I know what that's like to feel like, oh wait, I don't want to spend the next 7 years of my life with these characters. Like, no, thank you. So I think that some work for sure should have been done there. And also just that hunger and making sure that you have the time and that you can clear the space, because this is it's rigorous. And again, and the last thing I want to say, certainly, I mean, as I shared, it took me many years to get my novel out. So that said, I do believe that people can get a novel out in a year, but it's also, it's not a race.
No.
And so, everybody is working on their book at the pace that they need to be working on their book, and life gets in the way, and there's a lot going on. And the fact that you put forth this commitment and you're touching the manuscript daily and you're moving forward, like that's what really matters. And your cohort is there as a system of support and energy, and it's not a competition. It's not a race of who's got where everybody is on their word count. So I think that's really important to underscore. It's a good juncture in your life, a time where you can say, well, my year is fairly open or conducive to this kind of discipline. Then that's what I would encourage, because that's the way that students will milk the most from the course if they have the time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's like you said, we don't want to kind of like advertise this falsely to anyone. I think we do expect our students to come with a level of commitment and discipline and passion as well about what they're going to be writing. And so in order to get the most out of the course, the course will hold you accountable, but you also have to bring in that yourself, to be to really like get the most out of it, because you will be asked to produce quite a lot, obviously, because the aim is to get a publishable manuscript together by the end of the year. So that is a large task. So I think that's important. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge gift that you offer it's a huge gift to give to your work, and it's a huge gift to give to yourself, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing this year. I mean, obviously, life gets in the way, and there can be variables and unforeseeable factors, and your cohort and your tutor, that everybody's sort of flexible around that. But that is really, so wherever you are, as long as you have that seriousness and that passion, I think is a good pairing.
Yeah, and that's a lovely way to look at it as well, as a gift. I think too often we just don't allow ourselves that luxury to really dedicate our time to something we're incredibly passionate about, and it's a shame, because you just kind of go through life and you're just kind of the wheels are churning, but you're not really kind of like committing to something that you really feel strongly about. And so hopefully this course will allow people who it is the right opportunity for them, it will allow them that space to be able to do that and give them that room to really fully dedicate themselves to something, which I think is just, you know, hopefully a wonderful experience in itself, regardless of where it ends up even. So yeah, and I guess, you know, so if you're just joining us, you're just catching up on the conversation. So Sara will be a tutor on our Ultimate Novel Writing course, which is starting this October. So Sara is actually one of our US-based tutors. So if you are based in the US and you're interested in joining the course, do apply and select Sara to be your tutor. I know you're interested in working with students who are writing literary fiction. That's correct?
Yeah, literary. I'm mostly working. I mean, mostly, you know, students who are writing realist novels, students who are writing literary fiction and/or what we call upmarket fiction, which has a little bit of that crossover. That's kind of where I am in terms of my expertise and what I'll be, you know, the students that I'll be working with on the course. And again, yeah, there's this like disconnect, you know, how many times you might, I mean, again, maybe I'm just speaking for myself out here, but you know, you have that idea for the novel, you're turning over that idea for the novel, you're saying, someday I'm going to write that novel, someday. Right? And so if it just happens to be that someday is this year, then that would be, you know, then that's a good choice for you. But sometimes, we keep pushing things back on the back burner. And this is something actually I studied with the writer Meg Wolitzer a bunch of years ago, who's a wonderful, wonderful novelist. I can't speak highly enough about, and her novels are things to study. Particularly The Wife is one of the greatest crafted novels of all time. But she said to me when I was, again, a young mom and I was working with her, and she said, Sara, nobody is going to give you that time. No one is going to say to you, oh, why don't you go write your novel or, you know, go develop your craft. You have to steal that time. You have to take that time. You have to make that step, that commitment for yourself and for your work. No one is going, it's just not going to be given. And so part of, you know, the integrity of this course is making that commitment and making it firm and saying, I'm going to take this year for myself. I'm going to take this time for my book. And really drill down on that commitment.
Yeah, completely. I think it's just, you know, from speaking to, you know, fellow writers and yourself, and, you know, a lot of people have been in this kind of situations. A lot of the times I hear it's not always necessarily, you know, the people you think will get successful are the ones who are successful go on to get published. It's the ones who, you know, keep, you know, coming back to the book. Basically, they keep, you know, pushing on with that journey and they don't give up. And I think it's, you know, having that kind of constant, like, just dedication to something, even though it might take a long time. And, you know, many authors, I don't think it is the norm to get published straight away. So you do have to just have that certain level of, I guess, those expectations that, you know, this is the industry you're entering into. But yeah, I think it's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and I think that's a lovely, almost like a lovely, you know, punctuation for this conversation is the notion of perseverance and really that stick to itness, you know, and because in the face of all the things, you know, rejections from querying or what have you. I mean, you know, this is not an easy industry to be in. It's, you know, we are all, I'd say writers, we're sensitive, we're thin-skinned people, and yet we have to sort of develop this thick skin to kind of, you know, trust ourselves, trust our mission, and keep going, regardless of, you know, whatever setbacks we might experience. And also to, you know, be gentle with ourselves when, you know, when life throws us various things, and to know that just because, you know, you might have one setback, you can, you know, pick yourself up, keep going, recommit, persevere. And I do think you're right that those are the books that make it.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I guess probably a good point to leave people on, something to mull over. But that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Sara. I can't believe it's already been 30 minutes. That's just sped by.
So hang out all day.
I know, it really could. But thank you so much for joining us. Again, Sara will be tutoring on our upcoming Ultimate Novel Writing course starting in this October. She is one of our US-based tutors. So if you're based in the US and you're interested in joining the course, please visit our website. The link will be in the comments, and select her to be your your tutor if you're writing literary fiction. And I'll also post a link to all of Sarah's personal information, her social accounts and etc. in the chat as well, so you can go check her out, follow her, and make sure to look out for her book coming out this October. So thank you so much again, Sarah. And really lovely to speak
You're a
to you.
delight. You're a delight.
thank
Happy to
you.
talk to you anytime.
Oh, thank you so much.
This has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
You too.
Okay. Bye.